Compendium Podcast hosted by Leadership Books. In just a moment, our host, Joseph Baker, will be joining us, along with a very special guest. Before we get started, I would like to introduce you to Joseph. He's a podcaster, event producer, writer, speaker, and audience builder. His passion is to help authors, speakers, and entrepreneurs build their audiences to monetize their leadership. Won't you please welcome our host, Joseph Baker.
Well, welcome everyone to a very special edition of the Compendium Podcast by Leadership Books. We are here recording live at PodFest 2022 in Orlando, Florida. Jan and I met today during this event. Jan is a podcaster, she's a thought leader, she's an upcoming author, she's a trainer, she does all kinds of things. I'm going to let you tell a little bit of your own story. But Jan, thank you so much. Welcome to the Compendium Podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
And I know that instantly our audience is going to want to know, where is that awesome accent from? Tell us all, where'd it come from?
I'm from Wales. I am that passionate, feisty, rebellious character from Wales. I am a farmer's daughter. And I was supposed to grow up and marry the farmer next door, and something went horribly wrong with that plan.
So, well, you can't leave us hanging like that. You have to finish the story. And as a matter of fact, finish the story, because I know that leads into some of the things that you're doing today. So walk us through that a little bit.
Well, I grew up in a very small town in Wales, and I actually was supposed to marry the farmer next door. Maybe not literally the one next door, but certainly follow the line of farming.
Sure.
And I wanted so much more out of my life. I wanted so much more out of a career. I didn't know what it was, but I wanted it.
Yes.
And one day along came a temp agency, and they said, hey, we want you to go work at this place called Borg-Warner Automotive. And I thought, well, what is that? I thought they made batteries. They actually make transmissions. And that was in the mid-'80s. And I started working for Borg-Warner. I fell in love with the automotive industry. I fell in love with manufacturing. They moved me to the States. 35 years later, here we are.
Yes.
Worked my way up the corporate ladder, just like many of us have that dream to be in the C-suite.
Yes.
Worked my way through this male-dominated, aggressive industry, always thinking that the leadership model should be different, that we should be nicer and respect people, and not so much of the command and control.
Sure.
Thinking I was the only one that thought that. And it took decades for me to realize that authentic leadership, really being yourself, is the way to be. And so 4 years ago, let's say 5 years ago, I attained this position of Chief Procurement Officer for, at the time, a $3 billion company, which was a wonderful, I'd made it, right?
Sure.
Here I am.
Sure.
And then I was named to the ranks of the top 100 leading women in the automotive industry. So life is great, right? Well, no, it wasn't. I just didn't feel like I was living life in line with my values. And I believe wholeheartedly in authentic leadership, and I am on a mission to change an entire industry.
Yes.
The way that they lead and the culture of that industry needs to change, and I'm on a mission to make it happen.
That is awesome. What an awesome story. Tell us a little bit about your podcast, because I know you have a successful podcast, and that has led into now helping other people have successful podcasts. So tell us a little bit about the origins of your podcast.
Yeah.
Let's start there.
So I quit my job 4 years ago to start my own business, and then somebody came up with this bright idea, you should start a podcast. You need to showcase people who really practice authentic leadership every single day, share their stories so others can give themselves permission to do the same.
Yes.
And I thought, wow, that's a great idea, because I love to talk to people about leadership. Didn't know a thing about podcasting.
Yes.
2 years ago, learned it all the hard way, made every mistake you can possibly think of, got a lessons learned list as long as your arm. Launched my podcast, Finding Gravitas, the Authentic Leadership Podcast. And I found that I loved it. And I've learned, quite frankly, I have learned more by interviewing people on this podcast than I did in 35 years in corporate world.
Wow. Wow.
Who
That's amazing.
knew, right? So that's, again, the power of podcasting as a medium, right?
Yes.
And then I found myself saying, if I was back in my corporate job, I would start my own podcast. I thought, well, now, hang on a second. What's happening here? Is this the next big idea? Wait a minute. Why don't I just do that
Yes.
for other companies. Because people either want to understand the tech part of podcasting or the more of the I call it the HR side of it, right? What about the strategy? What employee engagement metrics
Yes.
are we trying to impact? What is the episode design? Well, I can do that. I've been doing that for years,
Yes.
right? Just not applying it and bolting on the podcast piece of it.
Yes.
So I thought, well, I think this is called adjacent revenue streams, right? You put two things together, you smush them together, you take one and one and you make 10.
Yes.
And so basically, that's what I'm doing right now. My major focus is to work with companies to help them really impact the bottom line, improve employee engagement. It could be focusing new employees, focusing tech, exposure to high-level executives.
Yes.
Making sure that you make them human, right?
Yes.
Podcasting is about human-to-human conversation.
Yes.
And this is what I'm doing now, and I'm absolutely loving it.
That is awesome. Our audience for this podcast is authors, speakers, thought leaders, consultants. Much of that you're already doing. We've been talking about the fact that you do feel that you are a forthcoming author at some point, so I know that's in the works. And a lot of these other pieces you've already been doing. You've been building your platform, you've been monetizing it, you're well on your way to success. But what's next? What's that next thing that you're looking to? Like, man, I can't wait for this. What does that look like for you?
Well, honestly, the book. People have told me, quite frankly, all of my life that I should write a book because my
Yes.
life has taken a lot of twists and turns. But from what I just told you, I said that I've learned more from interviewing people on the podcast.
Yes.
I want to share that with others now in a different format.
Yes.
Right, so we know the power of audio, but many people love to read a book.
Yes.
And I've
Yes.
interviewed some great people. I've interviewed Stephen Covey right before he released his book, Trust and Inspire. I've interviewed Daniel Pink. I've interviewed the CEO of Aston Martin, and on and on and on.
Wow.
And there's so much to learn from their stories.
Yes.
And it's time now to condense all of that.
Yes.
With somebody who knows what they're doing, because I'm not a writer and I never will be. I'm not a book publisher and I never will be.
Mm-hmm.
So I know what I don't know, and I'm
Sure.
never afraid to go and get the skills that I
Sure.
need to achieve my goal. So my goal is to share these
Mm-hmm.
stories in a book format with other people. Again, the mission, I remain true to the mission so that
Yes.
people can give themselves permission to lead in a more authentic way. And that's how we will change work culture.
That is awesome, and I agree with all of that. And the thing is, writing a book is still the number one way to establish yourself as a thought leader or an expert. So what's going to be amazing to watch with you is once you get that book out, you've also already built this platform, your podcasting and all the other things that you do, that I anticipate your book sales and that reach is going to go pretty far. So, some people will do the book first and then they'll do a podcast, and then they'll, create workshops. And you happen to have this podcast that you've already built. It's already successful, so much so that you're helping other people build their podcasting platforms. So I personally look forward to seeing what happens when you do release that book, and it sort of ties it all together and really establishes you. So that's going to be really fun.
Yes, it is.
Yes. So for our viewers and our listeners, how can we learn more about what you do? How can we connect with you online?
You can find me at gravitasdetroit.com. And you can contact me there. All the social media icons are on there to contact me, or email me directly. I love to hear from people directly. And that's Jan, Jan, at gravitasdetroit.com.
Excellent. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today for this somewhat spontaneous episode of the Compendium Podcast here live at PodFest 2022 in Orlando, Florida. Jan, thank you so much for being our guest today, and we hope that you have a wonderful rest of your event.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us for today's broadcast. I do hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And be sure to visit us online at leadershipbooks.store. There you'll find the works of some of the finest thought leaders today. And be sure to tune in here each week to gain even deeper insights from one of those leaders on the Compendium Podcast.